Sam, thank you very much to be here in the studio with us for this kind of interview about Iraq.
Thank you so much, Balan. It's an honor to be here.
I'd like to start my first question about Iraq after the liberation in 2003. The Iraqi dream didn't come true just because the Iraq failed in a very deep and complicated crisis, problem, situation. Why is that? What went wrong in Iraq?
Well, Balan, I think you know that Iraq is a very complicated society, and I am not sure that we had a plan to deal with all of those complications. Upon removal of the central power in Baghdad, many underlying problems manifested themselves. They were there during Saddam's time, those problems. Sectarianism was there before Saddam and during Saddam. Tribal issues were there during Saddam and before Saddam. And the Salafist jihadists were there before Saddam, during Saddam, and after Saddam. And without that central power and a government and the intelligence services and the police and local government, those ideas and movements were freed. And they turned their ideas into actions. And I'm not sure we properly understood what would happen in the event of the central government completely collapsing, which it did. And because we underestimated those complications, we were unable to win the hearts and minds of normal Iraqis. We were unable to co-opt tribal leaders early on to create order and ensure order. And also, I think that our benevolent intentions, and they were benevolent, were perhaps miscommunicated and did not realize themselves on the ground. And that is in part assuredly our fault as well, I think.
How?
Well, Iraqi culture is very diverse, and there are values. Good manners is valued above all things, I think, and that is something that I value as well. And I'm not sure that all of our actions were interpreted in that way, unfortunately. I can't speak for everybody, but I know why I was there. I was there as a soldier, as you know, at the time from 2003 to 2004, and then from 2005 to 2006, and then from 2006 to 2008, 4 years of my life. My intentions in going as a person were to do good things and help Iraq get on its feet in any way that I could as a person do that. And I think many of my brothers in arms were like that as well. But there were events that happened, and some of our mistakes spoke much louder than any of our benevolent actions did. And that is very unfortunate, very, very unfortunate.
Like what? Can you give me an example?
An example of some of the mistakes that we made.
Yeah.
Well, I think that we did not project a future for tribal leaders in Iraq. I think that we did not communicate or perhaps understand the necessity of their inclusion. I think that this pushed tribal leaders to be more receptive to Salafist jihadists who, frankly, were very polite and came to them speaking a language that they understood well and demonstrating the manners and ethics, I think, that were most understood by tribal leaders and normal Iraqis at the time. They came perhaps with bad intentions, but they had better manners than we did for sure.
Do you mean the Sunni and the Shiite tribes all together in this matter or no?
Well, I can't speak for every single tribe. I can tell you that in the areas that I was at, which were mostly Sunni areas, I believe that was the case. There was no shortage of goodwill between military leaders in 2003 and tribal leaders. But these things became overshadowed as mistakes led to other bad events and so on and so forth. And as the country moved from, being used to a strong central power to being involved in a state of civil war. And I think we did not anticipate that civil war occurring at all.
Don't you believe that the shortcoming was mostly from the Iraqis by themselves? They couldn't lead the country, they couldn't manage all these crises in the country.
Well, it would be very arrogant of me to place blame on anybody for events that were outside of any individual's control. But I do believe that in order for Iraq to move forward, which it must do, it must own the entirety of the Iraqi problem, and that Iraqi people, they have that solution, that they have to make that solution for themselves, or else any efforts from any external powers ever will always be interpreted in the light of unwanted intervention. That's what I believe.
Why it's important for the Iraqi government to gain the trust and the confidence of the tribes, and especially the Sunni ones?
Those tribes will always be there in Iraq. Tribal leaders will always have a varying degree of influence on the ground. That influence will wax and wane in accordance with the strength of local, provincial, and central government power. The more power there is, the less perhaps influence there will be amongst tribes. But in the instances where central power and local government is not exerting itself, tribal identity becomes very important. Also, that identity is an important one, and it's honorable and it is respectable, and it creates laws where perhaps no other laws are respected, and that can benefit the state, and that by gaining the trust of tribal leaders over time, and this is going to take a long time, that the tribes will then be able to have a positive influence on the creation and maintenance of a strong and benevolent Iraqi state.
According to my knowledge, as much as I'm talking to the Iraqi leaders, they are mentioning, and they are always insisting, that the new Iraq should not be based on a tribal things like what you said right now, and the importance of the tribes. How's that?
Well, I think the root of that idea is correct. The idea is that the state should represent all Iraqi people and not one tribe or another. I think that that's right. However, I struggle to find a government in the Middle East that does not have a ministry of tribal affairs, that does not attempt to administrate and take into account the needs of tribal leaders and their people. These are secular needs, and there is an interface for that, for an industrious and creative government.
Do you believe that Iraq can stay as a state, as a unified state for all the people inside the country?
I certainly hope so. And hope is kind of a dangerous thing, right? This is a very complicated time, and there are many people who have differing opinions on this, and I respect them all. From my perspective as just a citizen who spent 4 years in Iraq, I hope that Iraq will remain a country and that the government will be able to meet the needs of its people. That's what I hope. And I hope that everybody works towards that, because consider the alternative. If Iraq breaks into 3 separate states, will that lead to greater stability or greater instability? Will that mean that there'll be lesser foreign intervention or more foreign intervention? These are questions that have to be carefully considered by all leaders in Iraq, I think.
What you said, is it a message for the Kurds? And as you know, that right now there is some will to separate or to have an independent state.
Sure. And all of that depends upon the definition of what independence means. Let's consider the two things. Okay, does it mean independence from the central government of Iraq? And is that a viable means forward? Can a landlocked Kurdish state without access to Baghdad, without access to Basra, survive? Can that happen? These are questions that have to be answered by Kurdish leaders and Kurdish people. Are the inherent conflicts inside of Kurdish society resolvable? And will those disappear in the event that, say, a Kurdish state becomes independent from Iraq? Will those hamper it going forward? Is this a short-term solution that we're looking for in independence, or is it something that must be built over decades with careful planning and with a brotherly relationship established with the rest of Iraq? There are many choices ahead for the Kurdish people. Many choices, in my opinion. And with good leadership, with wisdom, those choices will be made properly. And then there's a third option, which is that independence can also be a state of mind. Is it possible for for Kurdistan to become the most diversified economy in the Middle East? Can the Kurdish people be the most industrious, the most well-educated, the best traders, and reach the highest levels of intellectual achievement, scientific achievement? I think that they can. And I think that investments in those things will create a de facto situation of the maximum level of independence that is beneficial, and perhaps without some of the drawbacks of hastily declaring an independence that creates enemies where there once were none, or worsens conflicts that are already in place. In my opinion, of course.
As far as you are monitoring the case in Iraq in general, and Kurdish case specifically, do you believe Kurds are ready to have their own state?
Well, states have to be built over time. You may have asked me before, perhaps when we were discussing before, if Iraq is falling apart, and my answer to you was that it was never really fully built. And it's almost like I feel like I have to ask the question, is the Kurdish state built yet? Or is this something that needs to be done over time? It reminds me a little bit of how Texas is. If you go to Texas and you ask people, some people in Texas, okay, is Texas a state or is it a republic? There are many people who think of Texas as a republic inside of the United States. Yes, it's a state, but it's almost like its own country, and it has a very vibrant culture, very, very vibrant and very benevolent. Texans take pride in the maximum level of contribution that they can make to country and to Texas. And maybe there's something to learn in there. And it's almost impossible to apply any model from America to anywhere else in the world, of course. But why can't Kurdistan be the greatest area of Iraq, the envy of the rest of Iraq, and a leader for the rest of Iraq, and show the rest of Iraq how to rebuild itself and lead in that and take full ownership in that? What a beautiful thing that could be. And you can see evidence of that. Look at the role of the Peshmerga in Mosul, the sacrifices that they're making. Are they making it for a free Kurdistan and an independent Kurdistan? I'm not so sure. I think that they see the same enemy that they have with that the Shiite population has, and even most of the Sunni population has. They're seeking to defeat an enemy that is the enemy of all of Iraq. What more noble thing is there?
While there is discussion about Kurdish state, many believe that it should be based on an agreement with Baghdad. But the question is, do you believe that Baghdad will agree for such a step while Baghdad is under the influence of several countries around the area? First of all, is Iran.
This is a very complex question, again, to be asking a United States citizen who doesn't live in Iraq. All of these things would be based upon interest. And the Iraqi state hasn't been fully built yet. There's a lot of investment that needs to be done. The benefit of an Iraqi government to the Kurdish areas, to Kurdistan, has yet to be seen. This keeps the idea of an independent Kurdistan very much alive. It is a negotiation that has to be done through Baghdad. Again, as I was referring before, what level of independence Kurdistan has should be done in a brotherly way with the neighboring peoples, and certainly Baghdad, as well as the rest of the countries around it. And maybe it doesn't have to be done right now, but certainly it should be done in coordination with everybody else, or else it will just create more problems for Kurdish people. And what we're looking for is less problems for Kurdish people. I think everybody could agree on that, right? So yeah, I think with the right type of communication, greater levels of independence and autonomy for the Kurdish state can be achieved, and without damaging or exacerbating problems, inside of Iraq. But right now, I think the main task at hand has got to be really building the Iraqi state. It wasn't even really built under Saddam. It wasn't even really built then. What was built was destroyed. And that gap, that vacuum has to be filled. And And to contribute to building that, I think, is a closer target, and that to show competence in building state there will help the Kurdish people learn how to build their own state within Iraq. And I think that there are many levels of autonomy that can be achieved there. And to a large degree, independence is a state of mind, isn't it? And that's something to be thought of as well, I think, as well.
You, as an American citizen, you mentioned that you are American citizen 3-4 times in this interview. As an American citizen, do you believe that the new administration, Donald Trump's administration, can solve the situation in Iraq, the problems, the disagreements, all the things in Iraq?
Well, that's asking an awful lot of the new Trump administration, in my opinion, right? Now, I think that those problems must be solved by Iraqi people. The Kurdish problems should be solved by Kurdish people, or they will not be solved. And I think, and what I'm hoping is that the new administration takes a very pragmatic approach to this, and a realistic approach to it as well. I think that we have a very deep friendship. I feel a very deep friendship with the Kurdish people. I've told you before, most of my teachers for Arabic were Kurds. Some of the smartest people I've met in my life speak 8 languages, like Mati Khoshaba or Jian Goza, who speaks 5 languages and can teach the grammar of all of those languages. These are amazing people. These people are smart enough to solve these problems. They are. And when they solve them for themselves, they will own that problem. And by doing so, it creates more independence. It does, because clearly, a Kurdistan that's independent from, say, the Iraqi government is one thing. Is that possible? But a Kurdistan that's independent and doesn't need aid from any other countries, is that possible? What level of independence are we looking for there? And to solve, for the Trump administration is to rule America. It's not to rule America, but it is to lead, the American people, and also to, focus on our foreign interests abroad. And a pragmatic approach to that, and I think deepening our friendships with, and our long-standing friendships with the Kurdish people would be a great thing for our country, in my opinion. But it can't solve that problem. It's very difficult for a person in Washington, D.C. to say that the people of Kurdistan should do this and this and this. People in Washington, D.C. are 10,000 miles away. And the people who live in Kurdistan are right there. Who knows more about Kurdistan? They do. They do.
Sam, my last question. Do you believe that there is another opportunity for reconciliation in Iraq after this long period of bloodshed, killing, arresting, disagreements, whatever you think about it?
Yes, there is a chance for reconciliation, but as you know, the wounds are very, very deep. It's going to be very difficult for the effects of all of the violence and the civil war to be mitigated in the short term. Those things won't disappear. They won't. Over generations, though, I believe that the bonds of trust can be reestablished between people in Iraq, that they must do so. And I think it will start by perhaps a renunciation of violence, sectarian violence for sure, yeah. And what I'm hoping for also is that the Sunni people of Iraq take their rightful place in participating in government and renounce the jihadist ideas 100%, and to protect themselves from those ideas in the future, because they are so dangerous to the Sunni population, very dangerous for them, and that it's been a pathway of destruction for them, a very, very unfortunate and very tragic. If I were to look at the sacrifices that have been made in Iraq by all the people, whether they are Shiite, Sunni, or Kurdish, or Yazidi, Sunnis have sacrificed a lot too, a lot. I've seen the most brave things that I've ever seen by some Iraqi Sunnis in standing up to the jihadist Salafist threat, to Daesh. They've done it. And those are the grounds of potentially establishing a greater brotherhood amongst the men, the brotherhood and sisterhood amongst the men and women of Iraq, regardless of sect. It's going to take decades. It won't happen in a year, but it is possible, but it has to be built through a concerted effort from the top to the bottom of Iraqi society, and everybody has to agree to do that. It's going to be difficult.
Although I said it's my last question, but I promise this one will be the last one. You mentioned the sacrifices by the Sunni tribes in Iraq, but don't you think this is the Sunni problems when they don't have a leadership, a unified leadership? Several people in Iraq, as Sunni figures in Iraq, they are considering themselves the leader of Sunnis.
A very complicated scenario that you've brought up there, and one that I don't know if I can entirely address. But so there's tribal issues. There's the issue of jihadist influence. There's the issue of the central government and its ability to provide for Sunni people, and perhaps its reluctance to do so in some cases. There are no short-term solutions to this, but I think what we soldiers call the 5-meter target, the one that's really close to you, that you have to take care of, is first definitively defeating Daesh, and then implementing a solid plan to keep the peace. If a solid plan to keep the peace is well enforced and peace is kept, a new normal of civility can emerge. And that's that dare to be great moment for the Iraqi government. That is it right there. To keep the peace and then begin to show benevolence and establish trust with the average Sunni person. A strong judiciary, one that people respect and where they know they're going to get a fair shake from the Iraqi government, is of absolute importance. The rule of law, and to know that that law is going to be fair to everyone, whether they are Sunni, Shiite, or Kurdish. If you break this law, you know this is going to happen. If you break that law, you know that's going to happen. That if those things are enforced and done so over time, the population will begin to adjust to the new normal and understand that is what civilization in Iraq is going to be like. But that 5-meter target is the important one. Defeat Daesh.
Sam, zor spas takam.
Thank you so
Zor
much.
spas.
Zor spas.